Uh, what I say is on the cloud, and someone's going to phone me up one day and say, you said. You know, when you talk about halacha, Jewish law, it's different than talking about when in yeshivish language you hear nogea. What is the minhag? What are people following? And I often talk about communities and what your community does, how they do it, and whether or not that's something you should follow. Because you might move, like let's say you moved to Austria and all of a sudden you're in a different community and they're doing things differently. You may adopt their customs, you may not, depending on how you might hold to your own customs. Look at how, my father, Alav Shalom, told me that we were probably, going back to my great-great-father, Hasidim. So my grandmother and grandfather were from the Vinnytsia district. Vinnytsia is near the Ukraine. Well, it's not near the Ukraine. It's in the Ukraine. It's in the Ukraine now. Putin's in there right now. He's storming around in Vinnytsia. That's all part of the Crimea area where he's taking over. And they had occupation of that land back in the 1800s. And my grandfather moved here around 1910. Now, when they came here, the reason I'm talking about this is because the Vinnytsia area of the Ukraine, which, by the way, the Baal Shem Tov, has anybody heard of the Baal Shem Tov? The Baal Shem Tov is known as the Besht. The Besht is the founder of the Hasidic movement. So when you think about Hasidicism, the Hasidim are from, there's all kinds of Hasidim. There's Hasidim from Bobov, the Bobov are Hasidim from Poland. There's Hasidim from other parts of Eastern Europe. A lot of the Hasidim are from Ukraine. And from other parts. I mean, there are Hungarians. There's a split in the Hungarians in terms of some of them are misnagdim. They're anti-Hasidic. Black hat, but anti-Hasidic. And then there were followers of the Baal Shem Tov. For instance, the Gerer Rebbe. The Gerer Rebbe, who is known as the book that he wrote, the Sfat Emet. There's a whole Hasidic Gerers. If you go to Brooklyn or Borough Park area or Williamsburg, you'll see all the Shtibelach, you'll see in Yiddish written above it, Ger, you'll see Mojitzer, you'll see Bobov, you'll see, I'm trying to think, Munkach. Munkach was in Hungary. It's an area of Hungary, and a lot of the Hungarian Hasidim are the Munkach Hasidim. Now, my family were probably Vishnitzer Hasidim. Vishnitz meaning from the word of Vinnytsia. So I was in a class. I didn't know this. Last Thursday, our Rav from our school said, from our yeshiva said, all right, next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we have Chazara and exam on Thursday. That's how they spring it on you, just like that. So it was quite frightening because people were all complaining, and we have a WhatsApp group for all the class, and everybody can share notes and share this, and you got this, and you got that, and I didn't understand this, and we talked. And people were upset because all of a sudden, they had plans for the week. They're getting ready for Pesach, including me. I have a lot to get ready for Pesach. We talk about preparation for Pesach. They don't care. You'll get ready for Pesach, but in the evenings, you're going to be at class, and they use the word in bold letters, mandatory. So mandatory means you got to be there because they're checking to see if you're there. And if you're not there, you can get permission to not be there, watch the class on the archive like you do here, and then you can have your notes, but you got to hand in the exam at the certain time. So the answer was this. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we've been on from 7:30 till 9 doing Chazara, doing review in preparation for this exam. Now, what I found interesting is in last night's class, we were having a discussion before the class. So I chime in just like you do early, and you come in and you might talk about something between yourselves. And the topic came up about kitniyot. Oy. Now there's a difference between discussing kitniyot here with you and discussing it with them. Meaning them, first of all, it's a yeshivish world. These people, so they're not considering other opinions other than ultra-Orthodox opinions, it's fine. I always like to try and follow as much as I can the Orthodox opinion anyway. I think that that's what we're supposed to do. And then if you fall short of that, you understand at least what it is that you're trying to follow, and then you'll make your own decisions accordingly. So we brought up the issue of kitniot, and I said, maybe I shouldn't have said this. I said, you know, in Israel, a lot of the people are just, they're just having kitniot anyway. And one of the men said, well, I'm a Vizhnitzer Chosid. So I didn't say to him, oh, I'm also from a Vizhnitzer Chosid. I didn't say that, but he said, and you can't change that, and you have no right. He said, there's lots of people in Israel that are eating treif too. So if they're eating treif, I mean, now he's comparing eating kitniot to eating treif, but kitniot is not treif. So I just ended the conversation like, well, that's good. You know, there's some. So I learned two words from a friend of mine a few number of years ago, and there's a joke about it, and I'll tell it to you one day, not here. And it's easier just to say, that's nice, and stop it. Two words, that's nice. That's nice is two good words to learn. So I didn't get into it because you're not going to win that, because you know that a custom is as strong as a law. To most. If your family didn't do something, you didn't do it. I once shared the story with you where I read Rabbi Galinkin, our Rabbi Galinkin, the one we have talked to. He wrote a tshuva on having green beans on Pesach. Most of you probably have read it, or you went to his classes, you studied, maybe you learned from him. And he said, you know, you're not separating the beans inside the beans itself. That they're in a pod. Green beans. If you take a green bean, first of all, green bean is a legume. Some people say it's a legume, and some people say it's not a legume. Some people say it's a vegetable. It depends. Look it up for yourself afterwards in the class and see, is it a legume or not? If you slit open a green bean, you can separate the beans that are inside that pod and take them out and isolate them. Who does that? You know, I mean, it happened by accident. You take the green bean, you eat the green bean, the whole bean, all of it together. That's the way I eat a green bean. That's what I call kedar ko, the normal way of eating a green bean, I think. I don't know anybody who says, now I'm going to eat the outside, now I'm going to eat the inside. It's not like a chocolate marshmallow or something where you want to take to me, it's eat the green bean. So having said that, if that's the normal way of eating it, Rabbi Galinkin said, if you're not separating it, then green beans should be allowed on Pesach. So I made for Pesach a matzah ball baked stew. It's interesting. You put in like stewed tomato, and you make knedlach, and you put the knedlach inside this, whatever it is, like a ceramic, whatever it is. And then you can put mushrooms in it, and I put green beans in it, not thinking about it. And I said to my father, it was like on the first night of Pesach, here, you got to try this matzah ball stew. It's delicious. So you're getting to eat as many matzah balls as you want. Like instead of meatballs, you're eating matzah balls. I didn't say it's low calorie. I'm just saying it's delicious. So I eat it. You should have some of this. He says, my father was very polite. He said, oh, that's okay afterwards. I don't know what afterwards meant. He never ate it. I said to him after, I said, how come you didn't want to try the thing? I thought it was because of gebrucht, which we're going to talk a little bit about. Gebrucht meaning something that rises, it becomes like cake-like, that some people follow a stringency about, and they don't have on Pesach until maybe the last day. Some Hasidim will eat it on the very last day because they consider the last day of Pesach to be mamish already not even Pesach, kind of almost. It's going out. And then it wasn't because of that. It was because of the green beans. He didn't want it because he doesn't eat kitniyot. That's his very strong custom, my father, and he didn't eat kitniyot. So if you're not going to eat kitniyot, then you're not going to eat those green beans. Doesn't matter what Rabbi Galinkin says. Doesn't matter. So have you ever yourselves tried to take on a kashrut agency? Have you ever phoned up the head of the kashrut agency and said, why is this not kosher? I did all my homework, and for me, my perspective is kosher. Has anyone here ever tried to do that? No one. Why not?
Because I'll lose anyway, so why bother?
So, Ruth, that's the most honest answer I've ever heard in my life. That's exactly truthful. You will lose anyway.
But it's also the same way with peanuts. Some people say you can eat peanuts and other people say you can't. Like, I don't eat peanuts.
You can't eat peanuts because peanuts are a legume.
Yeah, but that's the same thing. So are green beans.
So, but peanuts are not cannot be crossed over and considered a vegetable. Some people consider green beans a vegetable.
Yeah, but peanuts are sort of a vegetable because they're like a seed too.
If peanuts were considered a nut, then it would be different. Like a pecan or a walnut is allowed
But
on.
but they're not. It's not a nut.
It's
So
not a nut, but people think they're nuts.
But you can have it as a nut, or you can have it as a legume. But if you look it up in the dictionary, a peanut is a legume. So a peanut, because it's not a vegetable or it's not a nut, it's not considered an actual nut. Then that's why. So getting past that, I took on the kashrut agency. I won't say which one, but you can guess. It's very close to where we live. On 2 times in my life. One time I took them on related to what else, but Scotch. I took them on. I won't even mention the rabbi's name, but he's long gone. He's not around anymore. Zichrono Libracha, wonderful, brilliant rabbi. But you're right, Ruth. They get upset when you challenge them, even if they know that you might be possibly having a correct opinion. They can't allow you to ever be right, and if they allow you, it's a slippery slope. Everybody will be calling them up for everything. So I understand that. So one of the issues was Scotch, and I was saying, if something has been casked in a sherry cask, why should you consider it to be a non-kosher Scotch? Now, I couldn't use the excuse of Batov Beshishim, 1/60th, because when we talk about something being nullified in 1/60th, compared to for a minute, like the drop of milk that accidentally fell into the big pot of chicken soup, it's nullified by the whole big soup pot. So therefore, you can still have the chicken soup. You didn't purposely drop the milk into the chicken soup. You spilled the drop in, and you spilled in, even if you spilled in accidentally a 1/4 cup, and you have more than 60 times of that 1/4 cup. You can't do it intentionally. You can't, but you could, b'diavad, if it already happened, you could look at that and say, we have a leniency because you don't want to throw out the chicken soup. It was an accident. It didn't happen on purpose. And you're okay because it's 1/60th, nullified. I couldn't use the excuse of nullification, but I found a different leniency at that time. And I said to him, just a minute here, it's pagum, which isn't exactly correct. Now, we learned through our discussions on Pesach that if you wash something with detergent, something becomes pagum, it imparts a bad flavor to it. Therefore, it's not imparting a good flavor, and therefore be considered kosher. They use the case of a small little piece of ham fell into your stew, the rotev. In Hebrew, we'd call it rotev. The stew itself, and the stew has all kinds of little pieces. You can't even find it. You can't distinguish it. It's dissolved in there. The ham is there. We're supposed to believe, well, this is what we're taught. The ham imparts a bad taste because it's pagum. You wouldn't ever want it. You don't eat it. In fact, who wants ham? I'm thinking to myself, maybe it makes it more delicious. You know what I mean? But we're not supposed to think that way. We're supposed to be thinking, ugh, I'm sickened by it. I can't have it. So therefore, because you're sickened by it, you could have, like if I poured in detergent into your stew, you wouldn't like that. You wouldn't want the detergent in there. You're going to consider the ham to be like the detergent, whether it's true or not. That's where I went with it. I said, ham isn't really necessarily pagum. I said, stale taste that's been there and left behind as a residue after 24 hours is stale. So if you have a secondary transfer of taste, you have a knife, and the knife is put into the drawer and you washed it, but maybe there was a thin little tiny bit of residue of, I don't know, from meat on there, meat residue on the knife. and it was past 24 hours, we consider that meat residue to be considered pagum, to be imparting now a bad taste because it's a stale taste. Okay, let's call it a stale taste. When something is a stale taste, you can make that, if it was an accident thing, to say that it's 1/60th of the volume of the knife that cut the thing. Therefore, whatever you're having now, you can still eat. You know what I mean? But when I said that pagum, I said, now I know that casking scotch and a sherry that had a cask that had sherry in it before, the reason they're doing it is so they can say, one of the real reasons they're doing it, by the way, is because the casks happen to be available. A marketing thing is to say, oh, it's been second cask was in a sherry cask, and the cask is now imparting a good taste to the scotch. And because it's imparting a good taste, we can say it's finished in a sherry cask. It's so we can charge more money or say we're going to market it that way. But I said, if something was cask, that has to dry out. The cask has been sitting there for a year before they cast it in it. Therefore, it should be considered to be pagum, stale. If it's stale, we should be allowed to drink the sherry cask scotches. Well, no, that's not how it works. Goodbye. And that's the end of it. So that was the end of that conversation. Years later, I found out that Core certified many of those sherry cask scotches to be kosher. And then they change back and forth. They go, sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But they made a leniency for some of them, which I found very interesting. So because of that, something that was not considered kosher before is now being considered kosher. The second case where I challenged them was on quail eggs. I said, you are saying that quail eggs are not kosher. And I said, in the Torah, we were given quails. Remember they borched and complained in the desert and we're sick of manna. We don't want manna anymore. We want food. Give us food. So they ate so much quail that they were actually fed up with quail. It's like if you ate chicken every single day, 7 days a week, it wouldn't be special anymore. You might even get tired of eating it every day. So you might say, I want to change. I want salmon on Wednesday. I don't want chicken every single day. They were sick of eating the quail in the Torah. So this is a midoraisa. This is a Torah, something from the Torah that we're talking about. I said, quails are kosher. The eggs from a chicken is kosher. The eggs from a chicken are kosher. Therefore, the eggs from a quail should be kosher. That's not how it works. Goodbye. So, all right. Guess what? On my own, I ate them anyway. I decided for myself, quail eggs have to be kosher. I don't see this, and I got. Now, I don't buy them hardly ever anyway, because first of all, they're very hard to peel. That's the worst thing about a quail egg. You boil them, and peeling them is a pain in the neck. And you need about 100 of them to fill you up anyway. But I find them fancy. They're cute. So I used to buy them sometimes. The deal is, do you need it? Who needs it? What do I need to eat it for? It's like saying, what do you eat? There's enough other things to eat. I don't have to worry about eating that. But it bothered me, so I bought them and I ate them. I'm a rebel. What can I tell you? Big rebel. Now, if you go now, you see quail eggs, even at Costco, they're OU. They're certified kosher under the Orthodox Union. How come all of a sudden quail eggs are kosher? When I said they should be kosher, goodbye, now they're kosher. But if you look in some opinions on halakha, they are saying whether or not quail is kosher today is questionable. Just because something may have been considered kosher in the Torah even, at that time, may not be considered to be kosher in our community this time. So if you look in some books, some authorities say that quail itself, forget eggs, is kosher to Sephardim, but not kosher to Ashkenazim, because the Ashkenazim authorities said, we don't really think it's something that our community eats, so we're not going to eat it. The only people that were eating it were maybe, I don't know, the Moroccans or the Sephardim were eating it so they can have it for their community. You see how important what community you live in is, depending on the custom that you follow, it's an interesting custom that some people can eat quails and some people cannot. The same ruling goes for doves. I don't know why anybody would want to eat a dove, and pigeons. So pigeons don't eat, they're not birds of prey. So pigeon should be kosher. 100% a pigeon is kosher. But if you look in some books, the rulings by the poskim are that pigeons are not kosher because our community does not eat them. If you went into a store and saw a pigeon for sale and it was kosher, would you even buy it? Probably not. You'd say, what do I need a little pigeon for? I can have a chicken. It's bigger. What do I, you know what I mean? Like, it's going to, so you probably wouldn't even want it. So if you're not going to buy it, you're not going to eat it. Maybe the Rabbanim are saying, I don't want to get down that slope of saying that they're kosher, because if I say pigeons are kosher and one butcher selling them, you might come to buy, think pigeons, all pigeon is kosher. You might come to buy non-kosher pigeons that weren't shechted properly. Well, that could be a problem. Do you know that up until a certain point in history, turkeys were not considered kosher? You go and you buy a turkey and you eat a turkey if you want it. But turkey was questionable, whether or not a turkey is kosher. So there are all kinds of different issues when it comes to fowl, and all kinds of different issues depending on the community that you live in. In North America, turkey is 100% kosher. Why? You have American Thanksgiving. Among the Hasidim, they even follow it. Among the Orthodox Jews, never mind the rest of the world, they all celebrate Thanksgiving. And it's a yontif there, So you have they don't say Hallel, but it's a yontif. So they're all enjoying themselves. And they're having a turkey dinner. So turkey becomes kosher. But going back to the early discussion yesterday, when I was talking to this Vishnitzer Chussid about kitniyot, I thought, it's so strict, yet it isn't even necessarily a halacha. So I have a book, which, by the way, if you ever want to buy it, you can get it through any of the bookstores. This to me is an incredible book. It's called Pitchei Halacha, The Laws of Kashrut. Okay. It's written by Rabbi Binyamin Forst. It's an incredible resource. A lot of what we talk about is, some of it's a little bit yeshivish, so some of it you might not, but what it does is, for easy to follow, if you can't follow some of the laws and rules, you want to know something, it gives you drop-down charts. I want to show you this, if you can see this. You see the picture of the drop-down chart? So what does it says on here? Foods cut with a cold meat knife. So you're thinking, what did I do? I accidentally cut food, and you follow the drop-down chart. Cold meat knife was used to cut cold cheese spread, meaning cold cream cheese. If the knife was clean, then the food is permitted because it was a cold. So it tells you all about the transfers of taste. Now, listen to this. If you cut, remember we talked about a davar harif, a hot something, an onion, a garlic, whatever it is. Ginger is part of that. So let's just talk about, the reason I'm going to mention ginger is because let's say you're baking something. So you take a piece of ginger and you got to peel it. So you take a knife and you peel off the outside skin, that part of the ginger root. But now you're looking, you go, I don't want to use the hand grater. I don't want to use the hand grater. I want to now just grate it using the food processor. I'm going to put it into the food processor. Now, you didn't think about what you cut it with. You cut this hot ginger, hot meaning the taste, hot, davar harif, a hot item. You cut it with a meat knife. Okay? You didn't think about it. And now you put it into the food presser and you want it, you're grinding it up. And then you think, oh, shoot. You might not say shoot, you might even use the other word. And you say, I shouldn't have, what did I do? What did I do? I cut it with a hot, and the food processor is plastic. Now, because I cut it with a meat knife, if you cut a piece of ginger with a meat knife, that piece of ginger is considered to be meat. So you'd have to take off a slice to be able to use the rest of it. You cut off a klipa, a slice, and then you can continue using the rest of it. But if you now made that ginger meat by using a meat knife, because it's a hot item, and you put it into a food processor, did you now make your processor meat? The answer is no. The reason it's no is because it's notain tum bar notain tum bar nut, meaning a second transfer. You know, there's something that happened a step in between. When you cut it with the meat knife and you shaved it off, that's one step. But now you put it into a food processor, it's a second step. By that time, the meat transfer is not transferred. Come on. And for sure it'll be batal, and it's a secondary transfer. So you don't have to be concerned about that. So similarly, with kitniyot, in this book of halacha, which is quite thick and has a lot of rules and a lot of laws, at the back of it, it has every single law and kashrut, and even more so, if you go to the back of the back, it gives you an index of primary sources. It'll say the source for this is in Chulin in the Talmud. The source for this is in the Shulchan Aruch Yoredeya. The source for this is the Shach said, or the Taz said, or the whatever. You know, it tells you all of where it came from, where that opinion came from. But in the back, just the first part of the back, it tells you what to do in a case. You got a non-dairy this, and it was 24 hours since you've used it, and you have a this, and you had an issue of secondary taste transfer. You had a radish, and you cut it with this knife, and you had a this, and you brush your teeth, and it's this, and all these different rules. You know what I mean? Now, I looked up kitniyot. So that would be under K. That isn't kitniyot spelled with a K. I even looked under C. Guess what? It's not there. This entire kashrut book doesn't have one single word about kitniyot. Why? Because it's a book of laws. It's not a book of customs. So when you go to look at Eider's book, who wrote books on halacha, or you look at all these different rulings, you're not going to see anything about the issue of kitniyot. But the rabbis, the achronim, the second rabbis after the first early rabbis, after Yehuda Hanasi and after the very early rabbis, the secondary, the second level of rabbis, the later rabbanim, according to Rabbi Brovsky's book, Rabbi Brovsky was one of my teachers in the first year. He says in his book that there's a discussion about kitniyot and the enactment, and there's a debate whether or not we forbid kitniyot and why we originally did that in the first place. So if we go to the first, one of the early sources, we have to look at Rambam. Remember, we always started, whenever I talk about how we started very beginning in everything we ever did, we always look at what did Maimonides say, and then we take it down from there. So Rambam, in defining kitniyot, says that for the purposes of other agricultural halachot, distinguishes between grains, which include wheat, wild wheat, barley, oats, and spelt. Kitniyot, which includes seeds that are eaten, such as beans, peas, lentils, millet, rice, sesame seeds, poppy seeds, white peas, and all the things that are similar to that. And garden seeds, like seeds for garlic, or onion seeds, or leek seeds, or cabbage seeds, or flax seeds, are considered to be not even something you would normally eat, so they're not even fit for human consumption. Now, when I talk halacha to you, I always talk about, we look at first at what the I always talk about what Rav Yosef Karo said in the Shulchan Aruch, and what the Ramah said, what Rav Moshe Isserlis says. So in those authorities, the Darchei Moshe, which is Moshe Isserlis, he wrote a book called Darchei Moshe before he wrote his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, early on. So he was known early on as the Darchei Moshe. So whenever you hear Darchei Moshe, it's the same person as Moshe Isserlis. The Ramah and Darchei Noam are the same person. So he talks about whether seeds are not edible and whether or not they can be considered to be kitniyot. So if a seed is not normally an edible item, like a garlic seed, when was the last time you ate garlic seeds? You ate garlic, but not garlic seeds. You're not like, maybe you'd plant them, but you're not eating them. He said that includes, and I find this interesting because I always asked about this and I never got a straight answer. And maybe you wanted to know too. You ever go to buy Pesach mustard and it's fake? It's fake mustard. It's not real mustard. So, they include, I mean, look, you can buy Pesach Wurst, you can buy a salami. I'm not saying it's good for you, but you can buy it. What good is a Wurst without mustard? I don't want a Wurst without mustard. I want mustard, right? So you can't get, so they say it's kitniyot. So if mustard is in the category of kitniyot regarding Pesach, despite the fact that Rambam himself, Maimonides said that Rambam is not kitniyot. Now, when Brovsky writes this, he writes it, Rambam said mustard is not kitniyot, and he puts an exclamation mark on it. That the exclamation mark is saying, Rambam said it's not kitniyot, I think myself to be that passionate about mustard. I mean, I was never that passionate about mustard. I mean, I like it, but to put exclamation mark in, I thought that was something. So the Taz is the commentary on the right side of the Shulchan Aruch. And he explained that since mustard grows inside pods in a similar fashion to kitniyot, that's why the Rabbanim decided that they would say that it's not, it's prohibited. It's not allowed to, we're not allowed to have it. Now, Ruth, did you bring up the peanuts? You brought up peanuts. Okay, so here's the deal. Rav Pesach Frank, Tzvi Pesach Frank, said that peanuts are they're not generally a cooked item. Generally, you would eat them raw. So when you're gathering them in a fashion similar to kitniyot, they're treated the same. So what he's concluding is that the common practice is not to eat peanuts on Pesach. Okay, that's the common practice. Now, I don't know, maybe somewhere in the world they do eat peanuts on Pesach, but our common practice is not to eat them because it's not something that you would normally cook. Well, that was my issue with green beans. And later now, even the Orthodox rabbis are now, most of them, not all, but certainly members of the Rabbinical Council of America, the RCA, are paskening that quinoa is now kosher lePesach. It's not considered part of kitniyot. Well, I don't know. I have to tell you, I love quinoa. I think it's wonderful. I never buy it and I never eat it. I should really I always say to myself, why don't I make quinoa? It's a wonderful thing. I really like it. I like it and I should probably eat it and make it. And how come I never get it and I never buy it? So why? I said to my machatenis, the one, she said, oh, she's making quinoa for Pesach. I said, I don't make it for the rest of the year. If I'm not having it for Shavuos and Sukkot and Shabbos, why do I have to have it for Pesach? I can live without it for 1 week. But it was interesting how there was this big, yippee, quinoa is kosher lePesach now. So Rav Moshe Feinstein says that he doesn't agree with that. He agrees that peanuts, he says, he argues that we clearly do not refrain from all foods from which one, in theory, could make flour. So he said, after all, it is not customary to prohibit potatoes. You can make potato flour. In fact, we do make potato starch, right? For cooking, everything is potato. For Pesach, we're using potato starch instead of cornstarch. So he said, if you can take potatoes and make a common source of flour out of it on Pesach, then he says, furthermore, Rav Feinstein says, he insists, in fact, that we do not refrain from eating foods that are commonly stored with wheat. So if something is stored in the same area as wheat, that doesn't make it, just because it's stored, doesn't make it chametz stick. Now, I have to mention, once again, just to make sure to be clear on this, Ava, I'm keeping you up, you're yawning. I should stop talking maybe. All right, so you see, I see everything. So if you consider kitniyot to be actual chametz, then you are not correct. It's not. So if somebody in your home has to eat kitniyot, what does that mean they have to eat kitniyot? They're not well. They need lentils. They have to eat something. There's nothing for them to eat at Pesach time. They're vegetarians, let's say. Maybe they don't eat meat. They're not going to get any iron. They need that. You want to get that person nutrition. You can eat those lentils. Especially they use the example if someone is sick or unwell. Well, that's a big leniency. If you serve lentils, or forget about serving, you're boiling them in a pot. You have to cook them. You're boiling the lentils in your pot. What are you cooking them in? You're cooking them in your Pesach pot, right? So it doesn't make your Pesach pot chametzik. It doesn't even make it kitniyotik, because there's no such thing. It means that they ate it and you don't. It's like my father. I ate the green beans. He doesn't eat the green beans. Some eat green beans. Some don't eat green beans. So it's going to become up to you to follow that custom. And he explains, Moshe Feinstein, that the prohibition of kitniyot applies to foods that people refrained from eating, either because they were mixed together with wheat or because they were commonly used to produce flours. But foods that did not exist at the time of the development of this custom, such as potatoes. Potatoes, nobody ate potatoes back then. They weren't even using them. So if potatoes weren't the custom at that time of kitniyot, that's why they weren't prohibited. Therefore, in places where people did not refrain from eating peanuts, Ruthie, you ready? One may eat peanuts, according to Rav Moshe Feinstein. But you have to not take it that I'm giving you permission, or Rav Moshe Feinstein is giving you permission to eat the peanuts, because what he's saying is in places where people did not refrain from eat. See, again, what does the community do? Our dear friend Janice Goldman's, her father just passed away, and she's in the period of Shiva this week. So I went to visit her, and one of the questions that came up that she asked me about Shiva was, she said, Shiva ends on Friday. I said, actually, Shiva doesn't end on Friday. Shiva ends on Saturday. Because I said, a lot of people think that when a funeral happens on a Sunday, the Shiva ends on Friday. Let's count. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Oh, that's only 6 days. It's not 7 days. Shabbat is part of Shiva. You don't officially sit Shiva and wear Kriya, wear your tearing of the clothing on Shabbat. And you're allowed to stop early on the onset of Shabbat because you're allowed to prepare for Shabbat. But Shiva does not end until after Shachrit on Saturday, on Shabbat itself. And if Shiva ends after Shachrit, on Shabbat, you don't walk to exit the neshama. You don't go for a walk around the block. Why don't we go for a walk around the block if it ends on Shabbat, if it ends on Saturday? She said, well, do I go for a walk on Friday? I said, no, because then you're kicking the neshama out early on Friday. The Shiva doesn't end on Friday. The Shiva ends on Saturday. You were misled. Shiva is 7 days. 7 is on Saturday on Shabbat. Well, what do I do to finish it? You don't do anything. It just vanishes. That happened to me with one of my parents. It just vanishes. It just stops. Shiva ends. You don't have to end it officially by some rabbi coming to say magic words to you. Shiva just ends. Normally, if it ends, you go for a walk around. Why do you go for a walk? Because there's all kinds of different reasons. You walk for the circle of life. The same reason you might eat eggs when you come home. One person will say you walk because you're escorting the neshama, that it should go and be with God. There's all kinds of different customs and reasons for doing this. Why am I bringing this up? What does this have to do with kashrut? Because the custom in Toronto is not to walk on Shabbat. If you saw a family getting up from Shiva and walking around the block on Shabbat, you would think it was odd on Shabbat. You would say, what are they doing? Oh, they're getting up from Shiva. They're going for a walk on Shabbat. Never heard of such a thing. We don't do it here. But in Sweden, they do. I met a rabbi from Sweden who lived here he was actually the rabbi at the Lodger Center at one time. I'm trying to think of his name, and then he went to Montreal. Nebuch, he became very ill, but he moved to Montreal. I forget his name. From Sweden, the custom is that they walk, even if it's on Shabbat. They go to walk and they get up from Shiva formally that way. So if you lived in Sweden, that would be totally normal. That's what they do. What customs follow in different regions of the world could create opportunities for leniency. So in some part of the world where everybody eats peanuts on Pesach, you might say, I'm adopting the minhag la medina, the custom of the land, by just following along with all the people do here, because I'm never going to get away with it, because when I go to their house, because they're inviting me for their Seder, there's going to be peanuts in the green bean matzah ball stew. I don't know, like I'm just saying, like, I don't know, maybe there's going to be peanuts somewhere in one of their dishes, and what am I going to do? Not eat, you know? It's like the issue with rice. If everybody's eating, your daughter marries a Sephardic man, and their family custom is to eat rice on Pesach, let's say. So, you know, you can cook rice for them. You don't have to eat it. Your minhag is not to eat it. You're not going to eat it. They can cook rice. You could sit at their Seder and eat rice. It didn't come and stick up their dishes.
Does it? Like, if you cook it, wouldn't that hummus up your pot?
No, because rice is not chametz.
That's true. But
Right. Rice is kidneyot.
yeah.
So it's very interesting. And you know what, Ruth? That's what I get asked often. It's one of the most asked questions on Pesach, because you go, I don't know what to do. My son-in-law is coming I'm going to his house for Pesach, and they serve rice. How can I eat out of their dishes and pots? Pesach is one of the most strict times of the year. When you're not as strict during other times of the year, you're very strict. So if you go to a house and they're serving rice, I mean, provided that they change everything over for Pesach and the house is kosher Pesach and they make rice, it doesn't mean anything is chametz-dik. It means it's rice-a-dik. It's a new term I just fashioned. It's rice-a-dik. Rice-a-dik does not, it's kidneyot. You can for sure, absolutely. And even if you said, you know what, I'm going to break that rule and follow it, you're breaking a family rule of eating it. I'm not suggesting you do that. What I'm saying is there is something to following tradition. So the prohibition of kitniyot is not a prohibition of chametz. Chametz is completely different. And if there's a place where somebody eats chametz, not chametz, sorry, God forbid, somebody eats peanuts, and that's their minhag, you might say, I'm not going to eat that dish because that matzah ball stew has peanuts in it, but I'm going to eat everything else. You know what I mean? You're not going to eat the peanuts. You're not going to eat the rice. You wouldn't feel happy eating rice because your family didn't eat rice, but your Sephardic son-in-law and your wife, by the way, your daughter is allowed to accept the custom of her husband. Interestingly, the poskim never allowed it vice versa. They didn't say the boy married a Sephardic girl and he can change and follow his father-in-law's customs, and he can now change and eat rice on Pesach. That's not allowed. But the wife is allowed to adopt the customs of the husband. So where it works, where it's very valuable, I don't know if it's valuable, it's very interesting, is like Madeline. So my daughter married a Dutch guy, and their minhag is 1 hour after meat, you eat dairy. It feels weird to me that my grandchildren can have ice cream 1 hour and it's completely allowed because she's following her husband's custom. Now, if it was the other way around, he can't follow his wife's custom. You know what I mean? That doesn't work that way. So Rav Moshe Feinstein's rationale for this whole way of thinking, it calls into question a common practice. It calls into custom the idea of refraining from eating soybeans on Pesach. Now, I find that interesting because for me, I like tofu. and I eat tofu, not all the time. I understand even tofu is not good for you to eat all the time, but once in a while, I do like tofu periodically, especially if I'm making a dish where it calls for using cream and milk and good, delicious things like that, that I can't do with chicken. I'll give you an example. Indian butter chicken. I can't make butter chicken. I can't add cream to my chicken and make, that's usher, that's not allowed. But I can make it instead of using chicken, I use a tofu. So I can make an Indian flavored butter chicken recipe, and I can make it and add cream and tomato and everything I want. And I use the tofu in cubes instead of eating it. So the Chaye Adam, one of our poskim, says, he writes that some people actually did not even eat potatoes on Pesach because the potatoes can be used to make flour, even though Moshe Feinstein said it's ridiculous. But he said, however, the custom is to eat potatoes on Pesach. So this idea of soybeans, which could be made into a soy flour, is very questionable, but the custom is we don't do it. So the Achronim, these rabbis, are having a machloket. What else is new? What else is new for them to all of a sudden not agree on something? I can't believe that 2 rabbis or 3 or 4 rabbis don't agree on this idea of kitniyot. What I can tell you that I personally do not agree with, and I made this mistake myself a couple of times in one time in my life, and I have to adjust that. I got to get around, is that you can't just willy-nilly. The more I learn what I don't know. You can't just decide to adopt for yourself whatever it is that you want to adopt. Now, I have to be careful what I'm going to say here, especially because we're being recorded. Someone's going to say, I struggle with some of the things that the conservative movement allows. It doesn't mean that you should, because we have to consider it. That's our community. We live within that. And maybe you're going to consider that. What do I mean by that? I don't think that we have the right to just say for us, well, the conservative movement has now puskined as of a few years ago, by the way, that kitniyot is allowed. It's absolutely nonsense now. We don't have to be concerned about it. We don't have to worry about it anymore. You want it, have it, no problem. I have no problem with anybody having it. I don't care. Like we have Lily at home for Pesach. She eats lentils. She needs it because she makes a lentil soup. That's all the kid eats. So if she wants to eat lentils, I'm not going to say you can't boil lentils. Go ahead and have it. It's not chametz. It's not chametz. It's like rice. You can have that. If that's what your big aveira is, it's not even aveira. That your custom is you're going to have that because you need it. I get it. I understand it. So I'm not telling you, but to make a bold statement and just say the conservative movement now allows kitniyot. Well, you're disregarding perhaps 1,000 years of your family tradition going all about how your family might be, like I discovered that some of my family could be Vishnitzer Hasidim. Like I was going to get into the last night with this gentleman. I'm also a Vishnitzer Hasid. I'm not. I mean, well, maybe I could become one again. I'm not, but so the thing is that, but maybe your family were Vishnitzer Hasidim. Maybe your family were Baba Chassidim. Maybe your family were Misnagdi. Maybe they were stark black hat from people in Europe, and their custom was to not eat. Now, we could say their custom was also not to have women laning Torah like Esther does and David's beautifully. You could say a lot of things about customs. We do change customs and we adapt. So I'm not suggesting that you don't adapt and you don't change. That's far chas v'shalom. What I'm saying is that when it comes to practice for Pesach, things are more strict than they are the rest of the year. So hear this. I learned from Rabbi Brovsky in the first year of kashrut. Now, whatever I learned, whether it's medical ethics, whether it's kashrut, whether it's mashgiach kashrut, whether it's nida, what have I gone through in halacha? So many the medical ethics and all these different I'm trying to think of what else there was. Shabbat, all these laws that your head swims with laws after a while, right? They start to, what I learned is that you have to have a way of deducing from a source before you just make a decision and just say, well, everybody's doing this, I'm going to follow that. The conservative movement allows you to drink wine that is not kosher as long as the wine is not being used for the purpose of kiddush. I don't think that's a good practice. Because hear this. It's Friday night, you're at your house, and you love drinking this particular wine and it's not kosher. But you like it, so you drink it. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't drink it. You want it, you have it. You're not saying kiddush on it. Now you're going to make kiddush. So you reach for the kosher wine, and you have the kosher wine, you say kiddush, and now you go back to the other wine. Or on Wednesday, you have the other wine. Is it possible that you might come to forget and take the non-kosher wine and pour it in the kiddush cup? Possibly. But let's say you don't. You're really machmir, you're strict. You'll never do that. You look at the label, you make sure it's the right wine. This is the problem that happens. You got a wine rack, and on the wine rack, you're now going to take another bottle of wine because your company for Pesach, it's the Seder, have used a different. Now you reach for wine. No, your Uncle Harry doesn't know any difference. You're in the kitchen, you're serving the soup, and cousin Fred reaches over to your wine rack and says, "We need another bottle of wine." "Oh, don't worry, I'll get it." And they go over and they take another bottle of wine. And now they're using not a non-kosher wine, they're using a chametz stick of wine. Now it's not even a wine that is not kosher in general, but it's a chametz stick of wine. Now you've got a real problem. You got a real serious problem because now you're having chametz on Pesach. That's a big avera. That's according to the Torah, that's karet. You're cut off from the Jewish people. You can get stoned. It's a terrible violation.
But shouldn't you get rid of, like, you're not supposed to have any chametz in your house. So shouldn't you separate it or put it where you put your other chametz?
I have lots of chametz in my house. I have an extra fridge downstairs. I don't throw anything out. I put it into my chametz sticker fridge.
Okay, but then you take that wine and put it in that wherever you have your chametz. So it should be available.
You're right, but here's what happens. You're cleaning up for Pesach, and you get rid of everything, and you put it downstairs. But you forgot the one box of cookies. So anybody coming into your house thinks, well, if it's Ruth's house, it must be kosher at Pesach. It's probably fine. You take the cookies, but the Pesach is well. What I'm saying is that people are not getting rid of everything in their homes. They're cornering things off, and they're sectioning things off, and they're putting things in a cupboard, and maybe they tape things up and whatever. A bottle of wine near the dining room table on a wine rack that isn't kosher at Pesach is easy to miss when you're preparing for Pesach. It's a bottle of wine, and you open the wine, and it's not a kosher at Pesach wine. It's a problem. So what happens is, you could make a big fuss, or you could not make a big fuss and say, so big deal. So I did something wrong for Pesach. The world won't fall in on me, and I'll continue forward to be a good Jew, and I'll do other things. I'm not telling you that it's the end of the world. What I'm saying is that you have done something to violate Pesach unintentionally, not intentional. It's not you're purposely taking the chametz wine and pouring it in your glass. But if you don't have that problem, guess what? 99.9% of the wines that you buy that happen to be kosher are also kosher le Pesach. They almost all say peon. You can buy them in the summer, you can buy them in the fall, you can buy them in the spring, and you're pretty safe that they're going to be kosher le Pesach and kosher. The issue of whether or not they could be served by a non-Jew is a whole different issue. We're not going to get into today and talk about that, because some wines are not boiled, and then that's a whole different issue. That's a whole different topic. We talked about that once before. We're not going to get into that. But even oils, like when you talk about oils, a brand new bottle of 100% pure avocado oil or olive oil is kosher Pesach, or walnut oil. But, it doesn't have to have a kosher Pesach symbol. Neither does a maple syrup, according to OU. Neither does an orange juice bought before Pesach if it's pure orange juice, not from concentrate. If you're buying certain things, but they really want to be strict about it. So what I learned from Rabbi Brovsky, I'm going to share this with you to finish off, because how strict we have to be at Pesach and why, is I learned that the easiest thing to kosher in the world is a sink, if it's made of metal. If it's made of porcelain, halachically, you'd have to put a basin inside of it, like a plastic basin, because you can't kosher a porcelain sink. In the old days, you go to New York and in Manhattan, Lower East Side apartment that has an old one sink and porcelain, you got to change a plastic tub inside, because you got to be very careful. There's all kinds of different things I can talk about. Even Moshe Feinstein said you should put a grate on the bottom. A grate would separate anything coming in contact with the actual sink itself. But this is the interesting thing. A regular metal sink, you boil water on the stove in a pot, or you take a kettle that you plug in. They don't talk about kettles in the US, because in the US and in New York, they don't have kettles. They don't bother with electric kettles. They use stovetop kettles more, right? Right, Ava? They don't at the cottage, I use a stovetop kettle too. I don't use electric.
We never had electric growing up, ever.
Right. I just learned that about a month ago. I in one of my classes, we were talking about that. And I said, use the electric kettle. The teacher says to me, what? Like, he didn't even know what I was talking about. Like in Brooklyn, nobody has an electric kettle. I thought it was fascinating. It's a real Canadian European thing. So anyway, we have electric kettles. They're incredible, but they don't. So they talk about boiling a pot of water, pouring the boiling water that's still boiling on the sink. It's called irui, and you've koshered it. You can always over kosher something, meaning if something is koshered by pouring water on it, it's even better if you put it in boiling water and dip it. If it's good to dip it in boiling water, then it's even better if you put it in the oven at 500 degrees. If you put it in the oven at 500 degrees, it's even better if you put it to 900 degrees and you do a torch and burn everything off. I mean, you can never go too far in terms of koshering something, and that's true. But with the sink business, what I learned from Rabbi Brovsky was just pour boiling water in the sink, scrub it out, clean it, make sure that the strainer is clean, put the boiling water even on the strainer, and showing your sink is koshered. And then I came to school last night, and the Rav teaches us that's not good enough. Pesach is different than koshering for the rest of the year. For Pesach, you should have a barrier on the bottom. My mother always had, I don't know, we had this whole Pesach set of, we should have a Pesach rubber mat that went in the middle of the stove between the elements, because you can't kosher the in-between parts of the stove properly. She had rubber mats inside the sink that they cut holes in it so the water could drain through, so that any dish or anything went in, only touched the rubber mat. It didn't actually touch the sink. And I said, that's all Narishkeit. You don't need to do any of that. Why did my mother do any of that? It's stupid. You can pour boiling water on the sink. The sink is now koshered, and you can use the sink. That's what I learned. So I said, forget the rubber mat, because I had rubber mats. So you know what I did with the rubber mats last year? I threw them in the garbage. I threw them in the garbage and I koshered the sink. And now comes my rabbi last night, the teacher, and he says, you have to put a rubber barrier in the sink and have a strainer. And even some people say you can't even kosher the strainer because it's where food goes through. You'll never get it koshered enough. You should even buy a separate strainer. And they even go so far, the Hasidim, to take out the faucet strainer. They change that for a new strainer for Pesach. I'm not going to get crazy with you. I'm not going to tell you to do that. But what I'm saying is that if your strainer is metal, you can probably kosher it with hot water. But let's just go to that barrier thing on the bottom, the rubber mat. I'm thinking about this last night, and it's bugging me like crazy, because I threw them out and I learned you don't need to do it from one rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi. And then I learned from another rabbi who's an authority, 100% you need a rubber mat. What do I do? What should I do?
You're only supposed to listen to one rabbi, so you listen to the first one.
Well, I think that's a great approach, but I just couldn't do that because the last rabbi that I spoke to is the last word. You know what I mean? Like the first one gave me an opinion and I respect his opinion 100%. But this one says no. So I felt so guilty that this morning I went on and I ordered rubber mats to go in the bottom of the sink. So so I'll have rubber mats for the sink. Now, the point is, do I need them? No, I can kosher the sink. And I'm not telling you to do it. I'm not suggesting you do it. I'm telling you right now, from me to you, pouring boiling water is enough for koshering a sink. If you do that, you've koshered a sink. You got to do it properly and pour it all over the whole thing. But if your custom is to have a rubber mat at the bottom because you want to have a barrier because you're more strict for Pesach, then go ahead and do it. You follow whatever it is that your custom is to follow. Similarly, with a dishwasher or microwave. You know, last week when we spent an hour talking about dishwashers, I found it, the last thing I said was, and I remember this, I said, Rav Gedalia, okay, you got to leave, Noreen, bye. The last thing Rav Gedalia Felder said was you're allowed to kosher a dishwasher for Pesach. And Rav Gedalia Felder said, even if it's plastic, those plastic racks are smooth and they don't hold so you can use them. So what I'm saying is when Rav Gedalia Felder of Trump says that you can do that, you can do it. Similarly to the sink, you can kosher a sink, but if you want to go crazy, yes, grates can be used in place of a rubber thing, but then you got to have a grate that's kosher for Pesach. You do. Okay, so it's perfect, 100%. A barrier of any kind. You can put a piece of tin foil down there. It does, as long as you have a barrier, something, right? So I'll finish off just by saying that Pesach is different than the rest of the year. You can't consider the process. Everything can be koshered for Pesach, including knives, like I'm talking knives that are even have serrated knives and chef knives and all of, especially chef knives, they can be koshered, but the preference is that when it comes to chef knives, that things that are really doing duchta de sakina, like cutting with pressure through things, it's preferable for knives to have separate knives like that for Pesach. Preferable. Doesn't mean that you can't kosher them, especially if there's a situation of they're expensive and you don't want to buy them. It's too expensive for you to spend $500 on new chef knives. You can kosher them, okay? But the poskim say that. Pesach is an entirely different holiday. Don't think of it at all like any other holiday of the year. The rules are much, much more strict. And what I wanted to say was minhag hamakom, the custom of the area and the place that you live in is strong, but so is the custom of your family. Don't give up all the customs of your families. Hold on to some of them for yourself as your own personal traditions, because there's a value to that as well. Sharing differences and opinions is part of what keeps us going as a people, because we're never going to all agree on one way or one thing of doing anything. And I'll wish you all, you can send me questions if you have any questions. Chag kasher v'sameach. You should have a good, healthy, enjoyable Pesach, meaningful. And we're going to not be meeting next week. It's Pesach, and then we're not going to meet the following week. We'll take a break. And then after that, we'll start and we'll learn through some of the Hilchot Moadim. We'll learn on Shavuot. There's lots to learn about Shavuot, which is our next major holiday. We'll take a look at that. So any questions before we run? No? Good. All right. I told you I could talk for an hour. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Marshall.
I appreciate
Thank you.
Take
Okay.
care.
Take care, everybody.
Bye,
Chag Sameach.
everybody.
Hag Sameach.